It is said that the father of Jawaharlal Nehru, the former Prime Minister of India, sent all his laundry to Paris by mail to be washed, ironed, folded, and returned as well by the post. As we all know who have used an outside source at one time or another to launder clothes, inevitably there can be a kerfuffle or two. Buttons broken or missing, too much starch, a sock or two missing, etc. So the question is, how did Nehru Sr. deal with these problems long range? The author of the material for today's audio file, humorist S.J. Perelman, imagined a correspondence between Mr. Nehru and his French laundry. This appeared in the February 12, 1955 issue of The New Yorker under the title, "No Starch in the Dhoti, s'il vous plaît." A dhoti is a type of sarong that outwardly resembles loose trousers. It's a lower garment forming part of the national ethnic costume for men in the Indian subcontinent at that time. It is being delivered to you today by Al Burr.
My dear Mr. Planish, you may be interested to learn, though I doubt that anything would stir you out of your vegetable torpor, that your pompous, florid, and illiterate scrawl of the 27th arrived here with insufficient postage, forcing me to disgorge 1 rupee 3 annas to the mailman. How symbolic of your character, how magnificently consistent. Not content with impugning the quality of the cambric in my drawers, you contrive to make me pay for the insult. That transcends mere nastiness, you know. If an international award for odium is ever projected, have no fear of the outcome as far as India is concerned. You can rely on my support. And apropos of symbols, there is something approaching genius in the one that graces your letterhead, the golden fleece. Could any trademark be more apt for a type who charges 6 francs to wash a cummerbund? I realize that appealing to your sense of logic is like whistling an aria to the deaf, but I paid half that for it originally, and the Muslim who sold it to me was the worst thief in the bazaar. Enlighten me, my dear fellow, since I have never been a tradesman myself. What passes through your head when you mulct a customer in this outrageous fashion? Is it glee, triumph, self-approbation at the cunning with which you have swindled your betters? I ask altogether without malice, solely from a desire to fathom the dark intricacies of the human mind. To revert now to the subject of the drawers. It will do you no good to bombinate endlessly about sleazy material, deterioration from pounding on stones, etc. That they were immersed in an acid bath powerful enough to corrode a zinc plate, that they were wrenched through a mangle with utmost ferocity, that they were deliberately spattered with grease and kicked about the floor of your establishment, and finally, that a white-hot iron was appliqued on their seat. The whole sordid tale of maltreatment is writ there for anybody to see. The motive, however, is far less apparent, and I have speculated for hours on why I should be the target of vandalism. Only one explanation fits the facts. Quite clearly, for all your extortionate rates, you underpay your workmen, and one of them, seeking to revenge himself, wreaked his spite on my undergarment. While I sympathize with the poor rascal's plight, I wish it understood that I hold you responsible to the very last sou. I therefore deduct from the enclosed draft 9 francs 50, which will hardly compensate me for the damage to my raiment and my nerves, and remain with the most transitory assurances of my regard. Sincerely yours, Pandit Motilal Nehru. Dear Pandit Motilal, I am desolated beyond words at the pique I sense between the lines in your recent letter, and I affirm to you on my wife's honor that in the 6 generations the family has conducted this business, yours is the first complaint we have ever received. Were I to list the illustrious clients we have satisfied, Robespierre, the Duc d'Anglaise, Saint-Saëns, Coquelin, Mérimée, Bougerat, and Dr. Pasteur, to name but a handful, it would read like a roll call of the immortals. Only yesterday, Marcel Proust, an author you will hear more of one of these days, called at our établissement to felicitate us in person. The work we do for him is peculiarly exacting. Due to his penchant for making notes on his cuffs, we must observe the greatest discretion in selecting which to launder. Enfin, our function is as much editorial as sanitary, and he stated unreservedly that he holds our literary judgment in the highest esteem. I ask you, could a firm with traditions like these stoop to the pettiness you imply? You can be sure, however, that if our staff has been guilty of any oversight, it will not be repeated. Between ourselves, we have been zealously weeding out a socialist element among the employees, malcontents who seek to inflame them with vicious nonsense about an 11-hour day and compulsory ventilation. A firm refusal to compromise one iota has borne fruit. We now have a hard core of loyal and spiritless drudges, many of them so lackluster that they do not even pause for lunch, which means a substantial time saving and consequently much speedier service for the customer. As you see, my dear Pandit Motilal, efficiency and devotion to our clientele dominate every waking thought at Planiche. As regards your last consignment, all seems to be in order. I ask leave, though, to beg one trifling favor that will help us execute your work more rapidly in future. Would you request whoever mails the laundry to make certain it contains no living organisms? When the current order was unpacked, a small yellow-black serpent, scarcely larger than a pencil but quite dynamic, wriggled out of one of your doties and spread terror in the workroom. We succeeded in decapitating it after a modicum of trouble and bore it to the Jardin d'Acclimation, where the curator identified it as a crate, the most lethal of your indigenous snakes. Accept, I implore of you, my salutations, the most distinguished. Yours cordially, Octave Hippolyte Pleurniche. Dear Mr. Planiche, if I were a hothead, I might be tempted to horsewhip a Yahoo who has the effrontery to set himself up as a patron of letters. If a humanitarian, to garrote him and earn the gratitude of the miserable wretches under his heel. As I am neither, but simply an idealist, fatuous enough to believe he is entitled to what he pays for, I have a favor to ask of you in turn. Spare me, I pray, your turgid rhetoric and boot-licking protestations, and be equally sparing of the bleach you use on my shirts. After a single baptism in your vats, my sky blue jibbas faded to a ghastly greenish white, and the fabric evaporates under one's touch. Merciful God, whence springs this compulsion to eliminate every trace of color from my dress? Have you now become arbiters of fashion as well as litterateurs? In your anxiety to ingratiate yourselves incidentally, you have exposed me to as repugnant an experience as I can remember. 5 or 6 days ago, a verminous individual named Champignon arrived here from Pondicherry, asserting that he was your nephew, delegated by you to expedite my household laundry problems. The blend of unction and cheek he displayed, reminiscent of a process server, should have warned me to beware. But, tender-hearted ninny that I am, I obeyed our Brahmin laws of hospitality and permitted him to remain the night. Needless to say, he distinguished himself. After a show of gluttony to dismay Falstaff, he proceeded to regale the dinner table with a disquisition on the art of love, bolstering it with quotations from the Kama Sutra so coarse that one of the ladies present fainted dead away. Somewhat later, I surprised him in the kitchen, tickling a female servant, and when I demurred, he rudely advised me to stick to my rope trick and stay out of matters that did not concern me. He was gone before daylight, accompanied by a Jaipur enamel necklace of incalculable value and all our silver. I felt it was a trivial price to be rid of him. Nevertheless, I question your wisdom from a commercial standpoint in employing such emissaries. Is it not safer to rob the customer in the old humdrum fashion, a franc here and a franc there, than to stake everything on a youth's judgment and risk possible disaster? I subscribe myself, as always, your well-wisher, Pandit Motilal Nehru. Dear Pandit Motilal, we trust that you have received the bundle shipped 5 weeks since, and that our work continues to gratify. It is also pleasing to learn that our relative, Monsieur Champignon, called on you and managed to be of assistance. If there is any further way he can serve you, do not hesitate to notify him. I enclose herewith a cutting which possibly needs a brief explanation. As you see, it is a newspaper advertisement embodying your photograph and a text woven out of laudatory remarks culled from your letters to us. Knowing you would gladly concur, I took the liberty of altering a word or two in places to clarify the meaning and the regard you hold us in. This dramatic license, so to speak, in no way vitiates the sense of what you wrote. It is quite usual in theatrical advertising to touch up critical opinion. And to judge from comment I have already heard, you will enjoy publicity throughout the continent of Europe for years to come. Believe us, dear Pandit, your eternal debtor, and allow me to remain yours fraternally, Octave Hippolyte Pleniche. Dear Mr. Pleniche, the barristers I retained immediately on perusing your letter, Messrs. Bulstrode and Hawfinch of Covent Garden, a firm you will hear more of one of these days, have cautioned me not to communicate with you henceforth, but the urge to speak one final word is irresistible. After all, when their suit for 1,000,000 francs breaks over you like a thunderclap, when the bailiffs seize your business and you are reduced to sleeping along the quays and subsisting on the carrot greens you pick up around Les Halles, you may mistakenly attribute your predicament to my malignity, to voodoo, etc. Nothing of the sort, my dear chap. Using me to publicize your filthy little concern is only a secondary factor in your downfall. What doomed you from the start was the bumbling incompetence, the ingrained slovenliness that characterizes everyone in your calling. A man too indolent to replace the snaps he tears from a waistcoat, or expunge the rust he sprinkles on a brand new Kashmiri shawl, is obviously capable of any infamy, and it ill becomes him to snivel when retribution overtakes him in the end. Adieu then, mon brave, and try to exhibit in the dock at least the dignity you have failed to heretofore. With every good word and wish, and the certainty that nothing I have said has made the slightest possible impression on a brain addled by steam, I am compassionately Pandit Motilal Nehru.